Princess Kyrle stood at the grand balcony of the royal palace, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. The lights of the city twinkled like stars, but for Kyrle they seemed distant, much like the life she led. As the heir to the throne of Xanthian, the most advanced planet in the galaxy, she was expected to live a life of luxury and power. Yet, her position brought with it more restrictions than freedom. Every decision she made was scrutinized, every move carefully calculated, and her future had already been written by those around her. Today was no different. Her parents, King Velek and Queen Alira, had arranged another meeting with yet another suitor. It had become routine by now, these endless meetings with powerful beings from other worlds, all vying for her hand in marriage. But Kyrle had no interest in any of them. She had seen them all before, handsome, influential, and full of promises, but all with one thing in common. They saw her only as a means to an end. None of them seemed to see her as a person, as someone with hopes and dreams. They saw only her title, her beauty, and the political advantage she could bring. With a sigh, Kyrle turned away from the balcony and walked back into the palace. The air inside was cooler, the walls adorned with rich tapestries depicting the history of her people. The palace was a reflection of the grandeur of Xanthian itself, a civilization that had mastered technology, science, and the arts. The people of Xanthian were proud of their achievements, and Kyrle had been raised to uphold their legacy. But despite all the luxuries surrounding her, she felt a gnawing emptiness inside, a sense that something was missing, that something more than duty awaited her. As she entered the royal chambers, her parents were already seated, discussing matters of state with the latest suitor, a tall, muscular alien with silver-blue skin and glowing eyes. His name was Prince Arak of the planet Viridian, known for his strategic mind and his ability to command the loyalty of his people. He was everything that Kyrle was supposed to want: powerful, handsome, and a perfect match in terms of political alliance. But as he rose to greet her, Kyrle felt a wave of indifference wash over her. He smiled, his perfect teeth gleaming in the light, but to Kyrle it seemed like nothing more than a performance. "Princess Kyrle," Prince Arak said, his voice smooth and polished. "It is an honor to meet you. I have heard much about your wisdom and beauty." Kyrle forced a smile and nodded. "The honor is mine, Prince Arak. I trust your journey here was pleasant." "It was, thank you," he replied, his eyes scanning her face, clearly taking in her appearance. "I must say you are even more breathtaking in person." Kyrle's smile faded slightly, but she kept her composure. She had heard these words so many times before, always from suitors who were more interested in her status than in who she truly was. "I appreciate your kind words," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Please, let us speak of matters that truly concern us." Her parents exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke up. They were used to Kyrle's cool demeanor by now. They understood the pressure she was under, but they also knew that she had a duty to the kingdom. The alliance with Viridian was important, and a marriage to Prince Arak would strengthen the bond between their two worlds. Still, Kyrle couldn't bring herself to care about any of it. To her, all these formalities felt like a prison. Prince Arak continued to talk, discussing trade agreements, military strategy, and the potential benefits of their union. Kyrle nodded along, but her mind was elsewhere. She had heard all of this before, from every suitor who came to court her. None of them truly understood her, none of them saw the person beneath the crown. They all thought they could win her over with their wealth, their power, or their influence, but they never bothered to ask her what she wanted, what she dreamed of. They didn't care. They only cared about her title and what it could do for them. As the meeting dragged on, Kyrle found herself growing restless. She excused herself politely, telling her parents that she needed some time alone. With a murmured goodbye, she left the room, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls of the palace. She walked aimlessly through the corridors, her thoughts swirling in a haze of frustration. She had always known that her life would be shaped by duty, that she would one day marry for political reasons. But that didn't make it any easier. Every suitor she met felt like another chain being added to the weight around her neck. They all seemed so eager to possess her, to claim her as a prize, but none of them understood her. Kyrle paused before a large window overlooking the gardens. She stared out at the vibrant greenery below, watching the colorful flowers sway in the breeze. For a moment she wished she could escape, run away from it all and live a life free of expectations. But that was impossible. As the future ruler of Xanthian, she had responsibilities she couldn't ignore. The kingdom depended on her, and she couldn't abandon them, no matter how much she longed for freedom. Just then she heard a soft sound behind her, and she turned to see her handmaiden, Lyra, approaching. Lyra was one of the few people in the palace who treated Kyle as more than just a princess. She was kind, loyal, and always willing to listen when Kyle needed someone to talk to. "Your Highness," Lyra said with a bow, "are you well?" Kyle smiled faintly, grateful for her friend's concern. "I am fine, Lyra, just tired, I suppose." "Another suitor?" Lyra asked, her voice gentle. Kyle nodded, feeling a pang of annoyance rise in her chest. "Another one, Prince Arak. He's like all the others, handsome, powerful, but empty. He doesn't see me, only my title. None of them do." Lyra nodded in understanding. "You are more than your title, Kyle, but they only see what they want to see." "I know," Kyle said, her voice soft, "but it doesn't change anything. I have a duty to my people, and I can't ignore that." "I understand," Lyra said, stepping closer. "But you deserve more than this. You deserve someone who will see you for who you are, not just as the future queen." Kyle looked out the window again, her mind racing. She had heard the same words from Lyra many times before, but they always felt so distant. How could she ever find someone who truly saw her, who didn't care about her crown or her power? She wasn't sure it was possible. As she stood there in silence, a thought flickered in her mind, one that she hadn't allowed herself to entertain before. What if there was someone out there who could see her for who she truly was? Someone who could love her not because of her title, but because of her heart? She shook the thought away, dismissing it as foolish. That kind of love was a fantasy, a dream she could never have. But deep down, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder, was it possible? Was there someone out there who could see her for who she truly was? Princess Kyle walked slowly through the halls of the palace, her thoughts a whirlwind of frustration. The earlier meeting with Prince Arak still lingered in her mind, like an unpleasant taste she couldn't shake. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would find something different in him, but it was the same as all the others. There was no real connection, no spark of understanding. To them, she was just a prize to be won, a political alliance to be formed. She was more than that. She had always been more than that. Her footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as she made her way toward the grand hall, where the summit would soon begin. Representatives from various planets and systems had gathered for this event, and Kyle's parents expected her to be present as a symbol of Xanthian's strength and unity. But Kyle wasn't sure she wanted to play the role anymore. She wasn't sure she wanted to be the princess everyone expected her to be. As she walked, she tried to clear her mind, focusing on the duty that awaited her. She was the future ruler of Xanthian. It was her responsibility to uphold the legacy of her ancestors and to maintain the alliances that kept her people safe. But what about her own desires? What about her own happiness? She couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the longing for something real, something genuine. Kyle's thoughts were interrupted as she rounded the corner and saw a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. It was a man, a human man, dressed in the simple clothes of an Earth representative. His appearance was unremarkable compared to the grandiose dress and armor of the other delegates, but something about him caught her attention. He wasn't tall like the other suitors, and his face wasn't the sharp, chiseled look of a noble prince. His eyes, however, were different. They were filled with curiosity, as if he were seeing the world for the first time. Kyle stopped in her tracks, watching him from a distance. He seemed out of place in the palace, but there was something about his presence that made her feel at ease. She couldn't quite explain it. Her eyes traced his movements as he inspected a nearby painting on the wall, a look of wonder crossing his face. He seemed genuinely interested in the art, not as something to admire for its value, but for its meaning. Kyle's curiosity piqued. She stepped closer, still unseen. She had never noticed how different the humans were from the other species in the galaxy. They were new to this intergalactic community, still finding their way, but there was an honesty to them. A rawness that many of the other delegates lacked. The human man turned, suddenly aware of her presence. His expression shifted from surprise to calm recognition. He offered her a small, respectful bow. "Your Highness," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I hope I'm not intruding." Kyle blinked, taken aback by his directness. Most people, especially those of importance, were usually in awe of her, speaking with reverence and formality, but this man, this human had a certain ease about him, as if he didn't see her as just a princess. He saw her as a person. "You're not intruding," Kyle replied, her voice softer than she intended. What brings you here? I'm Captain Ethan Walker, he introduced himself, his tone warm but unpretentious. I'm part of the delegation from Earth. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, but I got a little lost. These halls are impressive. Kyril couldn't help but smile slightly. Yes, they can be overwhelming at first, but it's easy to get lost in here if you're not used to it. Ethan laughed softly, and Kyril found herself laughing too, despite herself. She hadn't expected to find anything amusing today, not after the long string of meetings and obligations. But there was something about him that was refreshing. He didn't seem to care about the grandeur of the palace or the fact that she was the princess. He just seemed like a man who was interested in the world around him, and it made her feel for a moment like she could breathe. "Would you like to see the rest of the palace?" Kyril asked, her voice almost as surprised as she felt. She hadn't intended to offer him a tour, but somehow it felt right. Maybe, she thought, this would be a good chance to learn more about him. He was different from anyone she had met before, and Kyril was curious to see where this conversation might lead. Ethan nodded, a surprised but genuine smile crossing his face. "I'd like that very much." They began walking together, moving through the grand halls of the palace, past rooms filled with rare artifacts and centuries-old tapestries that told the history of her people. Kyril found herself talking more than she usually did, sharing stories about her childhood, her studies, and the endless responsibilities she faced as the heir to the throne. Ethan listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that Kyril had never considered. His perspective was refreshing, and his questions were not about politics or alliances, but about her as a person. As they walked, Kyril couldn't help but notice how different Ethan was from the suitors she had met. His thoughts weren't clouded by the desire for power or wealth. He didn't view her as a means to an end, but as someone who had her own hopes and struggles. She had grown so used to people seeing her as a tool for political gain that it was almost jarring to hear someone talk to her without that expectation. They reached the royal gardens, a beautiful expanse of flowers and trees that had been carefully cultivated for centuries. Kyril gestured for Ethan to sit on one of the benches, and they both took a seat, the sounds of the garden filling the air with a peaceful hum. "It's beautiful here," Ethan said, looking around. "I've never seen anything like it. Back on Earth we have gardens, of course, but—" "Not like this," Kyril smiled. "It's one of the few places in the palace where I can find peace, away from the expectations, the politics. It's just quiet here." Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I imagine it's hard always having to live up to other people's expectations. I don't think I could do it." Kyril looked away, feeling a pang in her chest. He was right. It was hard, harder than anyone could imagine, but she didn't want to burden him with her troubles. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable with anyone before, not like this. But with Ethan, it felt easier somehow. Maybe it was because he didn't have any hidden agenda. He wasn't trying to win her favor or manipulate her into something she didn't want. He was just present. "I'm not sure what I want anymore," Kyril admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trapped between duty and desire. Everyone tells me what I should do, what I should feel, but no one ever asks me what I want." Ethan's gaze softened, and for the first time, Kyril saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You deserve more than that," he said quietly. "You deserve to have a choice." Kyril's heart skipped a beat at his words. No one had ever said that to her before, not with such sincerity. It felt different. For the first time, she felt like someone truly saw her, not as a princess, not as a political tool, but as a person. And it scared her. Because she didn't know how to navigate this new feeling, this new connection that was forming between them. "I have to go," Kyril said suddenly, standing up quickly. She felt a rush of emotions she wasn't ready to deal with. "The summit will begin soon." Ethan stood as well, though he didn't try to stop her. "Of course, but I'm glad we talked, Kyril. I hope we can do it again." Kyril nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yes, perhaps," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As she walked away, her thoughts were in chaos. She had never felt this way before, and it both excited and terrified her. What was happening between her and Ethan? Was it possible that someone like him could actually understand her, see her for who she truly was? Or was she simply imagining something that wasn't there? Kyril didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain: something had shifted, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what that meant. Princess Kyril couldn't shake the image of Ethan from her mind. The way he had listened to her, the way he had looked at her as though she were more than just the princess. Those moments lingered with her long after their conversation had ended. She had always been taught to focus on her duties, to live by the expectations placed upon her. Yet, as she lay in her bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, she found herself wondering if there was more to life than what she had been given. Ethan had shown her that there was, that someone could see her for who she truly was, not just the role she had been forced to play. It had been a week since their first conversation, and Kyril found herself thinking of him more often than she should. The memory of his warm smile, his kind words, and the way he made her feel had unsettled her in a way she hadn't experienced before. She was used to people admiring her, seeking her attention for their own gain, but Ethan was different. He didn't seem to care about her title. He saw her as a person, someone with thoughts and feelings, not just as a symbol to be admired from afar. The next morning, Kyril attended yet another summit meeting, but her mind wasn't fully present. As the leaders from various planets discussed trade agreements and military alliances, Kyril sat quietly, nodding in agreement whenever necessary, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. She remembered the way he had asked her questions about herself, questions no one had ever asked before. He hadn't tried to impress her with his knowledge or power. He had simply been himself, and that made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't felt in years. During a break in the meeting, Kyril found herself walking alone in the palace gardens. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the stone paths, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. It was one of the few places she could go where she could escape the weight of her responsibilities, where she could simply be Kyril, not the princess. She walked slowly, letting her mind wander. The palace was quiet today, and she felt as though she could finally breathe. But then she heard a voice and her heart skipped a beat. It was Ethan. She hadn't expected to see him again, at least not so soon. But there he was, standing by the fountain in the center of the garden, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked around, taking in the beauty of the space. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Princess Kyril," he said, his voice as gentle as it had been the last time they spoke. "I hope I'm not interrupting your peace." Kyril couldn't help but smile back. "You're not interrupting," she said softly, feeling the same strange pull toward him that she had the last time they met. "What brings you here?" "I was hoping to see you again," Ethan admitted, his smile turning sheepish. "I know it's a bit forward, but I wanted to thank you for showing me around last time. I enjoyed our conversation more than I expected." Kyril felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never been one to admit it, but she had enjoyed their time together as well. In fact, she had thought about it often in the days since. She had enjoyed the simplicity of their conversation, the lack of pretense. It had been so refreshing. "I enjoyed it too," she said honestly. "It's rare for me to have a conversation where I'm not treated like a princess." Ethan's expression softened. "I can only imagine. It must be exhausting, always being seen as something other than yourself." "It is," Kyril admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever see me for who I truly am, and not just as the future ruler of Xanthian." "You are more than your title, Kyril," Ethan said quietly, taking a step closer. "I see you for who you are, not just as a princess." The sincerity in his voice struck her deeply. She had heard these words before, from others who had tried to flatter her, but Ethan's words were different. They were filled with a genuine care that she hadn't experienced in a long time. She felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dormant for years. "I never thought I'd meet someone who would see me like that," Kyril said softly, almost to herself. Ethan smiled, his eyes kind. "I think it's because I'm not blinded by the weight of your title. I see you as Kyril, the person, not just the princess." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Kyril didn't know what to say. She had spent her entire life living under the pressure of her responsibilities, always being the perfect princess, the perfect heir. She had never allowed herself to be anything else. But now, with Ethan standing in front of her, speaking to her as though she were just another person, Kyril felt a sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their thoughts. Finally, Kyril spoke again. "I never imagined that I would find someone like you, Ethan, someone who doesn't want anything from me except to see me for who I am." Ethan's smile widened. "I don't want anything from you, Kyril. I just want to be your friend if you'll allow me." The word friend resonated deeply within her. It was something she had longed for but had never known how to attain. She had always been surrounded by people who wanted something from her, whether it was power, influence, or simply to be close to the throne. But Ethan wasn't like that. He wasn't interested in her title. He just wanted to know her, to connect with her as a person. "I would like that," Kyril said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I think I could use a friend like you." Ethan's eyes sparkled and he offered her his hand. "Then I suppose we're friends now." Kyril hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. The simple gesture felt so natural, so comforting that she almost forgot where they were. It wasn't about titles or status. It was about two people connecting on a deeper level, something she had never experienced before. As they walked through the garden together, Kyril found herself feeling lighter than she had in a long time. They spoke about trivial things, music, books, the best places to visit on Xanthian, but it felt different with Ethan. Their conversation flowed easily, effortlessly, and for the first time in years, Kyril felt truly herself. Later that evening, when the summit resumed, Kyril felt a strange sense of calm. She participated in the discussions with a clarity she hadn't felt before. She still had her duties to fulfill, but now she felt like she could balance them with something more. Something that wasn't about politics or alliances, but about her own happiness, her own desires. Over the following days, Kyril found herself seeking out Ethan more often. They would meet in the gardens or in quiet corners of the palace, where they could talk without the weight of the summit or royal duties pressing down on them. Every time they spoke, Kyril felt more and more drawn to him. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way he made her feel seen, understood, and valued. But with every meeting, Kyril also felt a growing sense of fear. She had never allowed herself to get close to anyone like this, especially not someone like Ethan, a human. She had been raised to believe that her destiny was to marry within her own kind, to form alliances with other powerful beings. And yet here she was, building a connection with someone who had no claim to the throne, no power, no influence. He was simply a man, a human, and that made her heart race with both excitement and uncertainty. She didn't know where this connection was leading, but she couldn't deny the way Ethan made her feel. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, and for the first time in her life, Kyril wasn't sure if she could follow the path laid out for her. She wasn't sure if she could marry someone just for political gain, not when she had tasted what it felt like to be seen for who she truly was. Kyril didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: Ethan had changed her in ways she couldn't explain. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just a princess, but a person who could choose her own path. Princess Kyril stood in the grand hall of the palace, her hands clasped together, her heart racing. The summit was in full swing, with diplomats, military leaders, and dignitaries from across the galaxy gathered to discuss alliances and trade agreements. But Kyril wasn't paying attention to the discussions. Her mind kept drifting back to Ethan, the human who had made her feel more seen in the past few days than she had in her entire life. He had become an unexpected presence in her world, and now she couldn't seem to stop thinking about him. She tried to focus on her duties, nodding politely at the representatives who spoke to her, offering brief comments on the progress of the talks. But it was hard to concentrate when her thoughts were consumed with the quiet moments she had shared with Ethan. She couldn't explain why he had such an effect on her. He wasn't like the others, the suitors who had tried to win her favor with lavish gifts and flattering words. Ethan didn't care about her title, her status, or her power. He only saw her. And that made her feel both vulnerable and free in ways she had never known. As the meeting continued, Kyril's parents exchanged looks across the table, their faces serious and calculating. King Velek, her father, was discussing the terms of a military alliance with a representative from the planet Veridian. Queen Alira, her mother, was engaged in conversation with another diplomat, but Kyril could tell from the way they looked at her that they expected her to participate in these talks more actively. But how could she focus on these matters when everything inside her felt tangled up with thoughts of Ethan? She excused herself from the meeting, feigning a need for fresh air. Her parents looked at her with some concern, but they didn't question her. Kyril had learned long ago how to make her departures seem natural. As she walked through the halls of the palace, the sounds of the summit faded behind her. The quiet of the corridors calmed her nerves, and she found herself heading toward the gardens once again. When she stepped outside, the cool breeze hit her face, and she breathed deeply, trying to clear her mind. The palace gardens were her refuge, the one place where she could be herself without the constant pressure of her royal duties. She often came here when she needed to think, to escape from the overwhelming responsibilities that awaited her. She walked slowly, her feet carrying her toward the fountain in the center of the garden. And there, standing by the water, was Ethan. He had come again just as he had the other day. His presence was both comforting and unsettling. He looked up as she approached, a small smile crossing his face. "Princess Kyril," Ethan greeted her, his voice soft and warm. "I hope I didn't intrude again." Kyril felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. "No, you're not intruding," she replied. "I was hoping to find some peace here, and it seems I've found it in your company." Ethan laughed lightly, the sound making Kyril's heart flutter. "I'm glad to hear that." "I find peace here too. It's hard to find that kind of quiet in the hustle and bustle of everything going on." Kyril nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The summit, the alliances, the people who want so much from me. It's overwhelming." Ethan's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "You don't have to carry all of that alone, you know." Kyril looked at him, feeling a sudden rush of emotions. It was easy to talk to him, to confide in him in a way that she couldn't with anyone else. "I know, but sometimes it feels like I don't have a choice. I have a duty to my people, to my kingdom. I can't just walk away from it." Ethan studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. "I understand duty," he said slowly, "but there's more to life than just duty. You deserve to have a life for yourself, too." Kyril felt her chest tighten at his words. How could he understand? How could anyone understand what it was like to live a life dictated by duty and expectations? She had always been taught that she had to put her kingdom first, that her own desires didn't matter. But Ethan's words made her question that. Maybe there was more to life. Maybe she didn't have to sacrifice her happiness for the sake of others. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," Kyril admitted, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I've spent my whole life being groomed for this role, and now I don't know what I want anymore." Ethan stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was warm and grounding, and Kyril felt a wave of comfort wash over her. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said softly. "Take your time. You have the right to figure out what you want. You have the right to be happy." The simplicity of his words struck her deeply. How long had it been since anyone had given her permission to be happy? Since anyone had told her that it was okay to want something for herself? All her life, she had been told what to do, what to feel, and what her future would look like. But in Ethan's eyes, she saw something different, the possibility of a future that was hers to shape. As she looked at him, Kyril realized that she didn't just feel comforted by his words. She felt something more. Something that made her heart race and her stomach flutter. She had felt it before, but she had pushed it aside, telling herself that it was foolishness, that it couldn't be real. But now, in this moment, standing in the quiet of the palace garden with Ethan, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She cared for him deeply, and that scared her. She withdrew her hands slowly, a feeling of uncertainty creeping over her. "I don't know if I can have that life," she said, her voice quiet. "The life you're talking about." Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Why not? You deserve it. You deserve to be with someone who loves you for who you are, not just because of your title. Someone who wants you for you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Kyril felt her pulse quicken, her breath shallow. She had never allowed herself to think about love, not truly. It had always been about duty, about what was expected of her. But now, standing here with Ethan, she couldn't deny the truth of his words. She did deserve something more. She did deserve love. But what did that mean for her future? Could she have both? Could she have love and duty? Or would choosing love mean abandoning everything she had worked for, everything she had been raised to do? She looked down at the ground, her mind swirling with confusion. "I don't know if I can have both, Ethan. I don't know if I can choose between my kingdom and this, and I don't want to drag you into my world, into all of this." Ethan reached out, gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met. "I'm not afraid of your world, Kyril. I'm not afraid of you." His words were simple, but they held so much weight. Kyril felt a lump form in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. How could she explain to him the fears that plagued her, the fears of losing everything she had known, of stepping away from the path laid out for her? "I'm not asking you to choose right now," Ethan said quietly, his voice gentle. But if you ever decide that you want something more, something for yourself, I'll be here no matter what." Kyril swallowed hard, her heart aching with the depth of his words. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a different future. One where she wasn't just the princess, the future ruler, but a person with the right to choose her own happiness. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But I think I'm starting to understand that maybe I have the right to want something." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm and understanding. "Take your time, Kyril, I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long time, Kyril believed him.